2,308 playthings. Sunny really hoped that the piece of Weaver's lineage was not hidden inside the dollhouse. Luckily, he felt nothing but an eerie sense of repulsion when standing in front of the terrifying toy, even though he was neither fated nor connected to the tapestry of fate anymore, and therefore had lost his supernatural intuition. His senses as a supreme were still beyond that of a mere mortal. He would have felt something if a demon's legacy was nearby. More importantly, Bloodweave would have reacted to the presence of another piece of the demon of fate. So, after studying the creepy dollhouse from a safe distance, Sunny shifted his attention elsewhere. He did feel that there was something special about that particular toy, a subtle scent of a demon, even. But that scent did not belong to Weaver. I think Ariel made this one. Kai looked at him, remained silent for a bit, and nodded. That very well may be. Sunny glanced around the toy room, studying various toys. The Song sisters had wandered off, lost in the memories of their childhoods. Despite his unease, this place must have been magical for adolescent girls. Especially those who had been orphans once, like Seishin and her sisters. Orphans did not live easy lives in this world. Sunny knew it all too well himself, and just like them, he had been robbed of the joy of having toys as a kid. Granted, unlike them, he had not been adopted by a powerful legacy witch. Come to think of it. Sunny narrowed his eyes and looked at Seishin. The Song sisters were adopted. Rain was adopted. What the hell, how come I'm the only one who hasn't been adopted? Where was justice in that? Kai smiled faintly. You have a peculiar expression, Sunny. What are you thinking about? Sunny lingered for a few seconds, then shook his head. Just thinking about how my life would have changed if someone like Kisong had taken me off the streets. For better or worse, he sighed. She really cared about her daughters a lot. However, she also forced the lineage of Beast God on them, as well as infected them with the nightmare spell. Were they lucky or unlucky to have met her? I'm not quite sure. With that, he glanced around once more and added, his voice somber, I'm also not sure if the Jade Queen was lucky to have met the Demon of Dread. Kai raised an eyebrow. How do you mean? Sunny shrugged. Well, think about it. Why is there a room full of toys in the depths of the Jade Palace? Kai seemed stumped by the question. Sunny remained silent for a bit, then said wistfully, it is possible that the Jade Queen had children, or that she simply enjoyed collecting toys. However, it is also possible that she was raised here, in this stone palace. By the Demon of Dread. He looked at the figurines wearing pretty dresses, dashing knights cast of precious metals, plush beasts with gem-like eyes, and the intricate dollhouse brimming with the bones of perished dolls. His expression turned somber. Demons were forbidden from siring offspring, you know. But they all seemed to rebel against that prohibition, in their own ways. Weaver left behind a secret lineage. Nether created the Stone Saints. Hope lived among humans and cared for them as their own. The Demon of Imagination had her mirrors and illusions. Sunny sighed. But what did Ariel have? Kai hesitated for a few seconds, then said cautiously. He had the Jade Queen. Sunny shrugged, unsure. Possibly. With that, he left Kai behind and went to explore the toy room. The five of them wandered the series of chambers for a while, studying the curios hidden there in ancient times. There were a lot of wondrous things to see, but none of them was what Sunny wanted to find. Eventually, only one last room remained. And, coincidentally, Sunny felt his blood stir as he approached it. There, he looked at Kai and the Song sisters, hesitated for a few seconds, and said, wait. They glanced at him curiously. Sunny did not know what he would discover in the depths of the toy room, but he had a strong suspicion that the fourth piece of Weaver's lineage would not fall into his hands easily. The first three had not, after all. So, he had to be careful. Looking at his companions, one intended, the other three accidental, he took a deep breath and spoke. There is a high chance that something unexpected will happen once we enter that room. Whatever it is, don't panic and let me handle it. If things seem too dangerous, retreat immediately. He paused, scratched his head, and then added nonchalantly, oh, and if something happens to me, wait until the next me arrives. Should only take a few days. There was a small chance that he would lose an incarnation here. That did not mean that he would give up on recovering the piece of Weaver's legacy. Revel tilted her head a little. The next, you. Sunny gave her a wide smile. Yeah, the next me. What? Did you think that being killed once would actually kill me? She stared at him for a few seconds, then let out a frustrated sigh. If I didn't think that, I wouldn't have tried to kill you, would I? Sunny laughed. Probably not. But, hey, it was an admirable attempt. No, Really, the ambush at Vanishing Lake was like a work of art. I gained so much that day. Thank you. Revel gritted her teeth, then ground them. You're welcome. Kai leaned toward him and whispered. She's lying. You're not welcome. Sunny gave him a stare, and then whispered back. Why are you whispering, fool? Everyone can hear you. Kai coughed in embarrassment. Oh, right, sorry. It's a habit. Shaking his head, Sunny took a deep breath and summoned Slayer. The murderous shadow rose from the darkness, looking at him and his companions from behind her veil. Death Singer immediately pointed a finger and opened her mouth, her face beaming with excitement, but before she could say anything, Sishin covered her mouth with a hand. Ah, I see you have a new servant, my lord. Sunny smiled. Oh, she's not a servant. She's an employee. Actually, now that I think about it, the two of you are kindred spirits. She only accepts payment in blood. Sishin did not say anything, but her gorgeous eyes suddenly glistened with a peculiar emotion. Sunny chuckled. But don't worry, I won't be collecting blood donations today. I already paid her this week, and plus, I don't want to brag, but she only has a taste for my blood. Turning away, she pushed the last door open and walked inside a small gyum. It had shelves with ancient toys, as well, but there was also a low table in the middle of it, surrounded by soft cushions. There was something on the table. A square jade board with small hinges in the middle, which suggested that it could be folded to become a case. Its surface was separated into 7 rows of 7 squares each, most of them were white, with only 3 squares at the bottom of the board standing out due to their vivid black color. There were intricately carved figurines standing on various squares, too, most of them representing alarming monsters. The 3 black figurines were surrounded by a dozen white ones. Sunny stared at the board intently, feeling his blood reacting to it with a peculiar, tingling sensation. There were no nightmare creatures inside the room. No awful danger, no startling secrets. Just old toys and the radiantly crafted jade board. Sunny raised an eyebrow, confused. What the hell is this? Slayer was already in the room, and Kai entered next. He glanced around, then studied the jade board curiously. Finally, he spoke. I think it's chess. 2309 Death Game. Sunny looked at the jade board for a few seconds, then turned to Kai. Chess? Have you gone blind all of a sudden? This looks nothing like chess. Indeed, Sunny did not know too much about chess, but teacher Julius had taught him how to play during his days as a guest lecturer at the academy. A chessboard was supposed to have 8 rows of squares, not 7. More importantly, white and black squares were supposed to be placed in a grid pattern. The jade board in front of him, however, was almost entirely white. Not to mention that the grotesque figures were nothing like the ones he was familiar with. There were no pawns, knights, bishops, or rooks. Instead, there were only a variety of grotesque creatures. Kai chuckled. I meant to say that it looks like a game similar to chess. Sunny frowned. It looked more like a war map to him. But why would a war map be in a toy room? He's right. Death Singer entered the chamber next and looked at the jade board with a fascinated expression. Then, she stopped moving entirely. Her pupils widened, making her glistening eyes look even larger. Sunny waved a hand in front of her face. Hello, what exactly do you mean? The petite woman turned her head and slowly focused on him, then threw a furtive glance at the board and forced out a smile. Oh, it's the Death of a Tyrant, also known as Death Game. It is a game similar to chess that was popular in various regions of the Dream Realm once, a long time ago. Some even say that it was invented by Shadow God himself. Sunny raised an eyebrow, then turned to the jade board as Sishin and Revel came in. Really? Death Singer nodded energetically. Really, Sishin, tell him. Sishin covered her nose with a hand, as if overwhelmed by a powerful scent. Her eyes grew oddly unfocused for a few seconds, but then she regained her composure and spoke in a calm tone. It does seem that way. Death Game is similar to chess, but instead of 16 figures, each player controls 14, 7 beasts, 2 monsters, 2 demons, 2 devils, and a tyrant. Just like in chess, each figure moves according to a specific pattern, but the rules are a bit more complicated. That is because when you play the Death of a Tyrant, your domain plays an important role too. She pointed to the board, where 3 black squares were surrounded by a sea of white ones. That is because the color of a square affects the battles between figures. Black figures have an advantage while battling on black squares, while white figures have an advantage while battling on white squares, unless they are surrounded mostly by squares of the opposite color. You can also conquer squares to make them a part of your domain. So, Positioning and movement carry greater strategic meaning. Cixin shrugged. Well, there are other differences as well. For example, in some versions of Death Game, there are squares with special properties, like the castle or the shrine. The former never changes color, while the latter can give a blessing in return for a sacrifice. If two figures battle on a shrine square, the one that is killed is considered the sacrifice, while the one that remains receives the blessing. Sunny blinked a couple of times. Interesting. How do you know all this? Cixin chuckled. How do you not know? It's a popular game among legacy children. We used to play it as well when we were young. Our mother taught us. Sunny stared at her with an unreadable expression. Then, he shrugged. That's because I'm not a legacy, I guess. She seemed surprised. Actually, Kai seemed startled, too. You're not. Sunny scoffed. Why, did you all imagine that I was a bastard child of a powerful clan, or had been raised by some sinister shadow faction? Sorry to disappoint you, but no. I am a completely self-made man. He contemplated for a few seconds, then added. Actually, I take it back. No one in this world is really self-made, and I too have received plenty of help from generous people along the way. With that, Sunny focused on the jade board. Most of the squares were white, and there were far more white figures left standing. The black side only had 3 figures left. One of them was wearing a crown, and was obviously the tyrant, while the other 2 seemed to be mere beasts. He tilted his head a little. Seems like someone did not finish a game. The black side was at a fatal disadvantage, but the tyrant was still standing, which meant that there was still a possibility of clawing one's way to victory. Naturally, it was more or less a hopeless situation. He studied the intricately carved figures for a few seconds, then shivered, suddenly overcome by an ominous sense of dread. The jade board gave him the same feeling as the eerie dollhouse. Perhaps it had been created by Ariel, as well. Sunny remained silent for a while, then asked. Who do you think the players were? Nobody responded, but he could imagine the demon of dread and the Jade Queen sitting on the cushions, moving the figures across the jade board and waging a mock war against each other. Had the Jade Queen played white? Or had she played black? In the end, it did not matter. What mattered was the fact that his blood stirred when he looked at the jade board. Which meant that the key to recovering the 4th piece of Weaver's lineage was somehow connected to this death game. Sunny took a step forward and looked at the jade figures. Eventually, his gaze stopped on the tallest of the white figures, the white tyrant. It's not the board itself. It's this one figure, in particular. His senses told him that whatever he was looking for was somehow contained in that small jade statuette. I wonder if I can find traces of divinity here. Sunny needed to understand if the jade board was enchanted, as well. So, he shifted his gaze and peered into its depths. And when he did, the shadows populating the small chamber suddenly surged, reeling back from the game table. Sunny himself paled, his eyes widening. His hand moved faintly, as if grasping for a memory weapon. The remainder noticed the change in his posture. Revel was the first one to frown. What's wrong? Sunny remained motionless, looking at the jade board with a somber expression. Then, he said evenly. Everyone, get away from that thing. 2310 Fear the truth. I'm going crazy. How had he not sensed a thing? Sunny had sharp senses, and they had only grown sharper after he attained supremacy. All awakened could feel certain things, presence, power, the subtle flow of soul essence. Corruption. And the stronger they grew, the more sensitive they became to the hidden side of the world. Especially so when it came to beings who were twisted by the corrupting influence of the void. Just like nightmare creatures could sense the scent of human souls, awakened responded to the presence of their sworn enemies, nightmare creatures. And yet, Sunny had felt nothing until he gazed into the depths of the gorgeous jade board. Inside the death game was a sea of corruption so vast and dark that it made his blood run cold. It was contained flawlessly, with not even a drop of it seeping out, but he could see the bottomless well of appalling darkness moving subtly. Surging, straining, waiting. He had never witnessed anything that malignant and pestilent before, not even when gazing at the corrupted deity, cursed tyrant condemnation. How the hell, how had he not felt it? Sunny should have become covered in cold sweat as he entered the toy room. That damned demon, what the hell had Ariel been thinking, leaving something like that lying around? Everyone, get away from that thing. The rest did not know it yet, but they were standing near a bomb. A frightening, inexplicable bomb full of corrupt ton. No, come to think of it, Death Singer had reacted to the jade board peculiarly. Cixin had covered her nose, as well, as if overwhelmed by the stench of blood. Sunny had noted their reactions, but having sensed no immediate threat, chose to question them later. At the moment, he was closest to the jade board. Kai was directly behind him, while Slayer was on the other side of the game table. The Song sisters were closer to the door. Hearing the tension in his voice, they backed away slowly. Sunny took a careful step back, as well. When he did, though, he noticed something. There were 4 runes carved into the jade board, 1 on each side. Snow, ash. His eyes narrowed. Fear. He did not see the 4th rune from where stood, but could sense its form in the shadow cast by the jade board. Single quote ... Truth. And just as Sunny read the 4th rune, the world suddenly shifted, dissolving into darkness. Damn, Asian. Sunny fell, his knees sinking into the soft ash. A cold wind suddenly blew across his face, making him squint. The first thing he felt was that he was not in the small underground chamber anymore, surrounded from all sides by white jade. Instead, he was in a vast open space, standing on his knees under a boundless sky. What the? Sunny jumped to his feet and reached into the shadows, manifesting a black odachi from them. The jade mantle revealed itself, covering his body like a black carapace. His shadow sense shot outward, searching for any sign of immediate danger. However, nothing around him was moving. The world was still, with only the wind blowing across the desolate expanse. It was only then that Sunny finally saw where he was. His hand trembled. What the hell? Stunned, he lingered for a moment, and then lowered his sword. The Jade Palace had disappeared. Sunny was somewhere else entirely. He was standing in the crater of a restless volcano. Behind him, a billowing pillar of smoke was rising into the dark sky, with moonlight spilling through the rifts in the clouds of ash. Black flakes were falling down like snow, covering the ground in a soft carpet. Sunny could not see it, but he could feel an enormous form hidden in the pillar of smoke. It was an ancient, crumbling fortress, its tall walls half buried in the ash. As his shadow sense encompassed the world, he felt the rugged form of stone slopes that fell at a steep angle, surrounding him from all sides. There was nothing else there, at least nothing he could find at a quick glance. Sunny hesitated for a moment. Am I on the other side of the bridge? He seemed to be standing in the crater of a towering volcano. The reasonable assumption would be that he somehow returned to where he and Kai had passed days before, but where was the city? Where was the bridge? Where was the Jade Palace? His shadow sense did not find any structures on the ashen slopes. More than that, the form of the volcano felt unfamiliar. Have I been teleported to somewhere else in the mountain range, then? Sunny scowled. What about Kai, Slayer, and the Song sisters? What was going on? An ominous suspicion rose in his mind, but he ignored it for the moment. The Jade Palace might have disappeared, but his shadow sense was still being somewhat suppressed. Its range was severely limited. Sunny could only feel the top of the volcano, but not its roots or other mountains that must have surrounded it. That was troubling. The first thing he needed to do was figure out where he was. Cassie. There was no response. Turning into a shadow, Sunny glided across the ash and soon crested the edge of the crater, thus reaching the highest point of the fuming volcano. He assumed his human form once again and glanced around, his expression turning somber. The landscape in front of him was odd, to say the least. The volcano he found himself on was not a part of a mountain range. Instead, it stood apart from everything, towering above a sea of misty clouds. The sky above was obscured by ash, rare rays of moonlight illuminating the stark world. There were other lonesome peaks rising from the clouds in the distance, situated in a peculiarly symmetrical grid. There was another volcano to his right, and one more to his left. In front of them, far beyond the veil of ash, 3 snowy peaks were bathed in moonlight. There might have been more lonely mountains further still, but Sunny could not see them. Behind him, the entirety of the world was vast and empty, with only the sea of clouds swirling far below. Sunny cursed quietly. Then, he cursed loudly. 3 black volcanoes surrounded by pristine white peaks. Goddammit. Sunny gritted his teeth. I knew something like this would happen. He was fairly certain that he had been sucked into the death game. 2311 Snow and Ash. This is a new one. Sunny studied the odd and magnificent landscape. The dark slopes of the fuming volcano drowned in falling ash, snowy peaks rose from the sea of clouds in the distance. Darkness and moonlight were intertwined like an elegant ink painting. A concerned expression settled on his face. Snow and ash, huh? The white side of this death game seemed to be snow, while the black side seemed to be ash. Considering that Sunny was standing on the central of the three volcanoes, he had become a warrior of ash. And not just any warrior, at that. In the game that Ariel and the Jade Queen had left unfinished, the black figure on the middle black square was wearing a crown. Which meant that Sunny had assumed the role of the Ash Tyrant. He groaned quietly. Curse it all. There were only 3 black squares left on the board, while the OTR-46 were white. There were also only 3 black figures left, the Tyrant and 2 beasts, while the white side had 12. Somehow, Sunny could not imagine Ariel losing so miserably. So, it must have been the Jade Queen who had played Ash. Just how terrible were you at chess, damn it? Sunny huffed in outrage, his heart overflowing with indignation. He was not sure what the future held, but there was a high chance that he would have to finish the game if he wanted to escape the alarming Jade board. That meant killing the Snow Tyrant from a woefully disadvantaged position. Wasn't the Jade Queen supposed to be renowned for her wisdom? Couldn't she have left him more figures to fight with, at least? He exhaled slowly. Calm down. He did not know anything yet. Even if his suspicion was on point, there was no telling how this death game worked. Obviously, the laws governing the artificial realm had to be different from the rules of the actual game, even if they seemed to be based on it. The battles between figures transpired according to the rules. For example, if the rules dictated that a figure had to lose, it would lose. But Sunny was not merely a figure, he was a person. A person who was notoriously difficult to kill and infamously lethal, no less. So, he could very well manage to slay the adversary despite the rules dictating his defeat. Wait, the adversary? Sunny's already somber expression turned even darker. Who was his adversary, exactly? The answer seemed obvious. It had to be the Snow Tyrant and the rest of the white pieces. But what were those pieces? Since Sunny was not a figure, but a living being that the game board had imprisoned. Then the rest of the figures could be the same. Remembering the DRAADFUL depths of corruption contained within the beautiful Jade board, he grimaced. If the snow figures were indeed living beings, they had to be powerful nightmare creatures. He had been surprised to see a well of appalling darkness greater and deeper than even the soul of condemnation, but if its source was not 1, but 12 ancient abominations, then it made sense. They are of the great rank, at least. Cursed rank. Sunny sighed deeply. What about the ash figures, then? He was the Ash Tyrant, but there had also been 2 ash beasts on the board. Were they nightmare creatures, too, or had someone else been brought into the death game with him? Usually, Cassie would be able to serve as a messenger between him and his allies, but his mental connection with her seemed to have been broken. Sunny hesitated for a while. First things first, before considering how to win the death game, he had to make sure that there was no way to simply escape it. If there was, then he would have no reason to fight the snow abominations. Or rather, fight them unprepared. Sunny was still determined to recover the piece of Weaver's lineage, and that piece was connected to the Snow Tyrant. Which meant that the Snow Tyrant and he would have to meet at some point. Sunny slowly assessed the situation. His current state was quite anomalous, and it was time to address the issue now. How odd. The first anomaly was quite bizarre. It was that he could not sense what his other incarnations were sensing. Sunny had 7 bodies, but he only had 1 mind. So, that should not have been possible. And yet, it was. He could not sense the shadows around his shades or around the members of the Shadow Clan, either. For the first time in a long while, his mind was quiet and desolate, populated by the senses of only a single avatar. It was sort of peaceful. Even his shadow sense was suppressed, enveloping only the part of the volcano that towered above the clouds. Damn Ariel, I really hate that guy. Each of his creations is worse than the previous one. Sunny scratched the back of his head, then sighed loudly. Well, I am sure that my other incarnations are doing just fine. More importantly, he could not feel a connection to his domain. Actually, he could not even feel a connection to his source element. The shadows still welcomed him, but he was not receiving any spirit essence from them, or from his army of shades, for that matter. Despite that, Sunny was connected to a domain and was being nourished by a source element. It was just that they were not his domain and his source element. Instead, it was Ash. Well, that made sense. He was the Ash Tyrant, after all. It would be reasonable to assume that his power would grow the more peaks he conquered. Currently, he only controlled 3, while the Snow Tyrant controlled 46. Sunny did not like these numbers at all. Moving on, he was quite curious about whether or not he could summon his shades. If he could, destroying the snow figures would be much easier. But, alas, he couldn't. In fact, he could not even enter his soul sea, or summon memories. He could not summon his shadows, either. Oh, come on. Sunny gritted his teeth. After assessing the situation, he concluded that the situation was simply ridiculous. So, in conclusion, he was trapped in a game created by the Demon of Dread, stripped of his powers, his equipment, and his minions. All he had was this one body and the shirt on his back, the proverbial shirt on his back, rather, since his clothes had been actually manifested from shadows. These were the only resources available to him in order to deal with 12 ancient horrors, including the ominous Snow Tyrant. Sunny lingered for a while, then smiled crookedly. This is quite unfair, isn't it? For the Snow Tyrant, naturally. Whose bright idea had it been to invite the heir of death to play the death game? Sunny shook his head. Those fools did not know what was coming for them. 2312 Rules of Engagement. Sunny could not extend his shadow sense to the neighboring volcanoes or to the snowy peaks in the distance, which meant that he could not use Shadow Step to reach them. Naturally, that alone could not stop him. If he wanted to, he could turn into a crow or weave wings out of shadows to fly to the lonesome mountains. He was not in a hurry to try, though. The sea of clouds below gave him an ominous feeling. The laws governing this miniature realm seemed to be based on the rules of the death game. Naturally, something as important as moving between the peaks should be subject to some kind of limitation. He remained motionless for a few seconds, then shrugged. Let's conduct a little test, then. Thrusting his Odachi into the ground, Sunny let go of its hilt and crouched. His hand plunged into the shadows, and as he rose, a long javelin was formed by them, resting easily in his grip. Sunny weighed the javelin in his hand and studied the white peak looming directly opposite the volcano, far in the distance. There were dozens of kilometers between the two, and the wind was quite severe. Taking a step forward, Sunny turned his body into a sling and launched the javelin into the dark sky. A deafening thunderclap rolled down the slopes of the volcano, and a billowing cloud of ash rose into the air in a vast circle around him. Below Sunny, the dark surface of the weathered rock was revealed from under the ash, only to fracture immediately, a web of deep cracks spreading from under his feet. The shadow javelin shot into the sky, sundering the veil of ash that obscured it and unleashing a torrent of pale moonlight. It was as if a silver line had been cut across the dark heavens. Sunny watched it fly with a curious expression. If he remembered correctly, there were beast figures on all three white squares facing the remaining black ones. So, a snow beast should be resting on the slopes of the snowy mountain the javelin was aimed at. Sunny could not see that far, but the snow beast was still in for an unpleasant surprise. Even if the javelin landed nowhere near the creature, a comet charged with supreme essence was about to hit the mountain. The beast would have to react in some way. That reaction alone would let Sunny learn more about the situation. When the javelin breached about half of the distance to the snowy peak, however, he paled a little. Oh, my, it was quite difficult to rattle Sunny these days, but he had to admit that he had felt a cold chill running down his spine just then. That was because when the javelin escaped from the clouds of ash, a gigantic gray tentacle rose from the sea of clouds below, reaching higher than the mountains and the volcanoes, and easily swatted it away. Then, the titanic tentacle swayed lightly and fell back, disappearing into the milky white clouds a dozen moments later. Its unfathomable mass created a breach in the swirling veil of clouds for a few seconds, but Sunny wisely decided not to try prying into what lay hidden below it. Some things were not meant to be seen by mere mortals, and some were not meant to be seen even by supreme demigods. He remained motionless for a while, then sighed, retrieved his Odachi, and placed it on his shoulder. Let's scratch the plan to explore the roots of the volcano, I guess. Sunny was quite happy that he had decided to throw a javelin first before trying to fly to the distant white peak personally. It seemed that he had been right to assume that there were laws governing the movement between the mountains. Not only that, but there was also an entity meant to enforce these laws. He remembered the harrowing gaze that had once fallen on him in the heart of the estuary of the great river, judging his soul. The corpses of innumerable great nightmare creatures, who had failed to pass the judgment, were floating in the dark water, but Sunny was allowed to pass unscathed. The alarming watcher had seemed unfathomably powerful to him as master, and now as the supreme, Sunny still had no desire whatsoever to fight against another being serving the demon of dread. He did not even want to know what that being was. Still, there should be an allowed way to move between the mountains, though. I just need to discover it. For now, however, Sunny wanted to focus on something else. He wanted to explore the volcano, and especially the crumbling castle standing in the middle of its crater. Just as he turned back, however, something unexpected happened. He sensed a new shadow appearing on the dark slopes. And a few moments later, a familiar figure landed on the ground near him. Ivory armor, auburn hair, electric green eyes, obnoxiously handsome face. Sunny blinked a few times. Kai. Indeed, it was none other than Transcendent Nightingale, the Dragon Slayer. The charming saint looked no different from how he had been in the toy room, and when Sunny shifted his gaze to peer into the supposed Kai's soul, it was pure and radiant, with not a hint of corruption hiding in its depths. He did not seem like an evil doppelganger or an illusory construct, but like the real deal instead. Were you sucked into the death game, too? Kai raised an eyebrow. Oh, so that is what happened. Sunny simply stared. I'm pretty sure that it is, yeah. Why, what did you think had happened? Kai hesitated for a moment, then smiled. Well, I'm not sure. You told us to back away, and the next thing I knew, I was standing on a volcano. That one over there. He pointed to one of the 3 volcanoes and added neutrally, I was honestly a bit disoriented. But then I saw the clouds of ash part, as if cut by something, and finally noticed you here. So, I flew over. Sunny shivered. You flew over. Kai coughed. Yes, I was already in the air when that thing rose from the clouds. I guess I could have turned back at that point, but I would have had to slow down to make a turn. And honestly, seeing that tentacle made me want to fly faster than I had ever flown before. Sunny let out a stunned chuckle. No kidding. He remained silent for a few seconds, and then smiled. Well, welcome to my volcano. You don't know how glad I am to see you, buddy. How glad I am to see you, buddy. 2,313 pawns of ash. One of the questions seemed to have been responded. Kai was a saint, a transcendent beast, so he took the place of one of the ash beasts that had remained on the death game board. He had also traveled between the volcanoes without being erased from existence by the being below the clouds, which gave Sunny a hint about the rules of this miniature realm. He would have to think about that in more detail, but for now there was a more pressing question that needed to be responded. Kai had been able to see Sunny across the great distance dividing the 2 volcanoes due to his awakened ability, which granted him unparalleled sight. So, Sunny looked in the direction of the 3rd volcano, wondering who had taken the place of the 2nd ash beast. Can you see who is out there? Kai looked in the direction of their volcano and faltered for a moment. I think you might want to take a step back. Sunny frowned, then did as he was told. A moment later, a black arrow plummeted from the sky and sunk into the ash, right where he had been standing. Sunny stared at the arrow for a few seconds, then shook his head. He would have been able to dodge it even without Kai's warning, probably. But definitely not without rolling on the ground gracelessly. That damn murderous lunatic. He inhaled deeply. I guess Slayer is here, too. And it seemed that her eyesight was just as exceptional as Kai's. She lacked the ability to fly, though. So, she had announced her presence in her usual barbaric way. Sunny pondered the situation. There was a small possibility that the Song sisters were somewhere here, as well, having taken the place of 3 white figures. However, Sunny rather suspected that they had not been imprisoned by Ariel's game. If so, one question remained. Where had the actual Ash Tyrant and 2 remaining Ash Beasts gone? Looking at Kai, he hesitated a little and asked. Hey, do you think that Seishan, Hell, and Revel are fighting 3 ancient nightmare creatures in the toy room right now? Kai seemed startled by the question. He looked at Sunny with wide eyes, then shivered. I really hope that they are not. Sunny inhaled deeply. Well, don't worry too much. Seishan is quite resourceful, so I am sure she'll manage somehow. After all, she had survived on the Forgotten Shore for a decade, longer than anyone else who escaped it. Revel, meanwhile, was one of the deadliest saints in existence. Not only had she gone against Sunny and lived to tell the tale, but she also conquered the spine ocean of Godgrave while annihilating 7 saints of the Sword Army and their entire expedition. And while Death Singer was sort of disarming, she was actually quite alarming as well. Sunny did not forget the first time he saw her, entering the council chamber of the Song Army with the same innocent look, but also with blood dripping from her crimson hands. Plus, they were in the Jade Palace, their former home. Considering how well Revel knew the magnificent palace, they had an overwhelming terrain advantage. Noticing that Kai still seemed worried, Sunny patted him on the shoulder. Cassie is keeping an eye on the situation. You know that she always has a contingency. Kai lingered for a few seconds, then nodded slowly. Still, considering how serious the consequences are, I think I have the right to know what the purpose of this entire endeavor is, at least. Sunny studied him with a faint smile. Finally ready to ask questions. Huh. Well, fair, I'll tell you. He looked into the distance, where the snowy peaks rose above the sea of clouds. But what was he supposed to say? Any honest answer he could give would be forgotten. Eventually, Sunny said evenly, I guess I am searching for the key to the nightmare spell. Kai's eyes widened a little. The key to the spell. Sunny nodded. It is easy to lose sight of the big picture because of all the immediate problems we are facing. The resettlement of humanity, the looming threat of total annihilation, even the race to apotheosis. All of it is so great, so overwhelming, so all-consuming. But even while we are dealing with these eschatological issues, we mustn't forget about the ultimate goal. Kai sighed. I am starting to grow tired of sounding like a parrot, but, ultimate goal. Sunny chuckled. Yes, the ultimate goal. Godhood. He turned and looked at Kai without any humor in his lightless eyes. Humanity can only survive if new gods are born from it. Which means that someone has to conquer the sixth nightmare, the final nightmare. Someone has to become divine. Even apotheosis is merely a stepping stone on the path to true godhood. Sunny shook his head. But it is not that easy, is it? Now that we are mere men, we can allow ourselves to follow the path of ascension blindly. But if we dare become gods, we have to dare look upon the gods as equals, instead of merely being their puppets. We must be willing to not only question the will of the gods, but also to endure the weight of the answers we find. Kai frowned, confused by his words. Which gods? Sunny laughed quietly. All of them, but one first and foremost. Weaver, that nebulous knave, the chief puppeteer of this whole affair. Why did Weaver create the nightmare spell? How? To what end? All of us are following the road that Weaver built, and at this point, we can't afford to ignore the mystery of why it was built, and what is waiting for us at the road's end. Kai glanced at the distant snowy peaks, lingered for a few seconds, and asked. And the answer to that question is here. In this odd realm that Ariel created. Sunny sighed. A piece of the answer, at least. That is what I believe. He glanced at Kai and shrugged. I mentioned Weaver's lineage earlier. That lineage, you see, is a cursed thing that should have never existed in the world. And yet, Weaver scattered it across the tapestry of fate for us to find. That demon never did anything without a reason, so it is my belief that there is a reason why they unleashed this curse upon the world. There seemed to be no reason whatsoever for Weaver to have left behind a cursed lineage, unless it was for the purpose of destroying the world. There were easier ways to destroy the world for someone like Weaver, though, so Sunny did not believe that Weaver's cursed lineage existed for that reason. Flaws were seen as curses, as well, and they were. However, flaws also pushed those who carried them to grow and improve. In that sense, they were blessings. The description of his lost fated attribute had said that there were those who were blessed, and there were those who were cursed. However, rarely was there someone who was both blessed and cursed. But actually, every awakened was both blessed and cursed, existing in a state of fateful balance. Mayubi Weavers had been forced to maintain the same balance, too. Perhaps the demon of fate had wanted to bless the world, but could only do so by leaving a curse behind as well. The nightmare spell, the forbidden lineage. Which one was a curse? Which one was a blessing? Possibly Weaver's cursed lineage was the spell's flaw. 2,314 ponds of snow. Sunny remained silent for a while, then chuckled. Well, whatever it is, we'll find out sooner or later, as long as we live long enough. He considered his next steps. Kai, meanwhile, was studying him with a complicated expression. So you are searching for pieces of a demon's lineage? Sunny nodded. Yes, and one of those pieces is somehow connected to the snow tyrant. Speaking of, he hesitated for a moment, then asked. You saw me from all the way on that other volcano. And you can see Slayer, too. So, can you see what is waiting for us on those 3 mountains, as well? Kai opened his mouth, then closed it again and looked into the distance. After a while, he said in a subdued tone. Yeah, I see them. Bingo. Now, he would at least know what they would have to face. Sunny leaned on his odachi lazily and asked, his voice calm. There should be 3 snow beasts on those mountains. What do they look like? Kai hurriedly glanced away, as if someone out there stared back at him. He shivered, then brushed his hair back and straightened. Right in front of us, the whole mountain is riddled with caves, like an enormous ice beehive. Inside, a swarm of insect-like abominations is slowly coming to life, each of them seemingly carved from gemstones. They look frightful, if a little mindless. Sunny's face fell. Huh, so a single figure can represent a whole swarm of abominations, not just a lone beast. I see. What of the other two mountains? Kai frowned. The one on the right, there's a statue standing on its peak. No, not a statue, more of an automaton, I guess. A clockwork knight. Actually, he looks like the giant version of one of the toy knights we saw in the toy room. I feel an enormous amount of dread when looking at him, though. That one is not an easy abomination, I think. This time, it was Sunny's turn to frown. If a single abomination makes Kai more wary than a swarm of them, then it must be powerful. A cursed beast. It's possible. And what is on the third mountain? Kai shivered. There is a worm-like creature there. Actually, it's not on the mountain, it's inside the mountain. This creature is simply enormous. It seemed to have hollowed out the entire mountain and made a nest inside of it, coiling into a sphere. It took me a while to realize what that immense mass of flesh was. A sour expression appeared on Sunny's face. A giant ice worm, huh? He had just come from months of battling giant millipedes. He had really had enough of worm-like creatures. Sunny sighed. I'm guessing that one is a cursed one, as well. A swarm of great nightmare creatures and two fallen deities, and these were some of the weakest snow figures on the board. The first battles of the death game promised to be quite unpleasant. Sunny glanced at Kai. What is your condition? I mean, how weird is it? Kai seemed to understand what he meant. My aspect is entirely unaffected. However, I can't enter my soul sea, my source element seems to have switched to ash, and on top of that, I can't summon any memories, only those I was wearing when the game snatched us are left. That is, just my armor. Sunny nodded silently. So you are completely unarmed? Kai nodded in discomfort. Yes, I can still assume my transcendent form, though. So, that's something. He said that, but he was wrong. It would have been fine to engage the enemies as a dragon in most other situations, but here, the enemies were much stronger than Kai. He could probably fight a great nightmare creature, but not a cursed one. At least not at a close distance. If he had a good bow and arrows, though, he could at least assist Sunny from afar. Kai was an archer of sublime skill, after all, second only to Slayer herself. Sadly, he was in the same predicament as Sunny. Ariel's game had sealed their soul arsenals, somehow. Sunny sighed. It's a good thing that I weaned myself off overly relying on memories. Kai is a different story, though. Alright, I get it. What had he found out? There were powerful enemies on the three snowy peaks facing the three volcanoes. Moving from the volcanoes to the peaks, and vice versa, was prohibited at the moment. However, moving between the mountains of the same domain seemed to be allowed. There was an important difference from the actual death game he could not overlook, too. It was that Kai was currently standing next to him. If he was simply moving figures across the game board, two game pieces would not have been able to occupy the same square. There has to be a way to make an actual move. In other words, if some conditions were met, he would be able to attack the snow abominations, but since Sunny did not know the laws governing this miniature world, yet, it was far more probable that the snow abominations would attack him first. Rather, they would either make a move to attack the Ash Tyrant, or attempt to conquer the remaining volcanoes first. Seishin had mentioned that there were special squares in some versions of the death game. Squares with a castle, for example, never changed color. If the crumbling fortress on this volcano was one such castle, then the Snow Tyrant could attempt to conquer the other two volcanoes to prepare for the final siege. Are there any structures on the volcano you came from or on the one where my shadow is currently waiting to be rescued? Kai shook his head. Not that I can see. Sunny lingered for a few seconds, then nodded slowly. All right, then, do me a favor please, go to the next volcano over and bring that murderous woman here. Whatever happens next, we'll have a better chance to survive it together. Kai smiled. No problem. A moment later, before Sunny had time to say anything else, he was already flying away. She's not going to kill him, right? Right, she wouldn't. Wouldn't she? Sunny scratched the back of his head. Why am I worried? If I need to worry about something, it's that Slayer might become one of Kai's fangirls too. Shaking his head, he sat down on the ground and reached into the shadows. I won't give her any more of my blood if she does. Kai can give her his if he wants. Above him, the wound his javelin had dealt to the veil of ash that obscured the sky was already repairing itself, and the world was once again submerging in darkness. 2315 Army of 3. While Kai was away retrieving Slayer, and hopefully not being killed by her, Sunny was busy as well. He was making a bow for Kai, manifesting it from the shadows. One would think that making a bow was quite easy. All Sunny needed was to manifest a long narrow bar and make it bendy, then string it. Naturally, manipulating the internal structure of manifested shadows to imbue them with a suitable level of elasticity actually demanded an intricate level of shadow manifestation mastery, but Sunny was more than capable of doing just that. Once, he could barely control the outward form of manifested shadows, but by now, he could make them into pretty much anything he wanted. However, there was a difference between simply making a bow and making it worthy of a transcendent archer. It was not even a matter of enchanting the bow. Before that, the structure of the bow itself demanded careful consideration. Sunny had studied that obscure craft in the past, and he delved into it even deeper while crafting bows for Rain and Slayer. For example, there was the choice between a more traditional recurve bow and a more advanced compound bow. Compound bows offered more power and convenience, but Sunny had shied away from crafting them in the past due to how difficult they were to maintain and care for in field conditions. A weapon needed to not only be deadly, but also reliable. Especially so in the dream realm, where the environment itself was often the adversary. These had been his considerations in the past, but now that Sunny was armed with the knowledge of how the nature of a weapon affected its capacity to carry wool, he also suspected that wielding a compound bow would be a detriment to a transcendent archer. But even if he wanted to create a recurve bow, which was much simpler in structure and was therefore a more faithful emissary of the archer's will, things were not easy either. That was because, in his opinion, a good recurve bow had to be a composite one. Instead of a single length of wood, it had to be composed of layers of different materials, all glued together for optimal results. The simplest composition commenced with a wooden core, a softer wood used for the bending parts of the limbs, and stiffer wood used for their tips. Then thin plates of horn, which stored energy better when compressed, would be glued to the belly of the bow. Finally, animal sinew, which possessed greater elasticity than wood, would be glued to the back of the bow. All of that allowed for more energy to be stored when the bow was drawn, and for that energy to be released in a more optimal way when the string was released, resulting in more powerful and deadly shots. So, Sunny had to carefully manipulate the manifested shadows to imbue them with qualities that resembled different types of wood, horn, and sinew. Actually, since he did not have to limit himself to only reproducing naturally existing materials, he could play around with these qualities to achieve the best result. Luckily, he had already done his research when crafting a bow for Slayer. He also had a good idea of how strong Kai was, exactly, so, he could create a truly powerful weapon for his friend. Additionally, there was a matter of how he wanted to manifest the shadows. Making them permanent would be easier, since he would not have to maintain their form either consciously or constantly, but that way, the bow would be much weaker, somewhere between the ascendant and transcendent ranks. So, Sunny decided to sustain the manifestation personally. That way, Kai would be wielding an ostensibly supreme weapon, something he would need desperately before too long, no doubt. Manifesting the varied types of shadows into proper shapes and fusing them together was an intricate task. Sunny worked meticulously, using his 2 hands to craft the weapon. At the same time, he used 4 more hands to weave strings of shadow essence. He could not enchant the bow just yet since there were no soul shards in his possession to anchor a weave, but a few would hopefully fall into his hands soon. Sunny wanted to be prepared for when that happened. Look at me, am I not the most benevolent of tyrants? Who else would sit on the ground and personally craft weapons for their pawns? He chuckled, but that was simply the first step. Here inside Ariel's game, Sunny was a general in charge of an army. His army consisted of only 2 soldiers, but it was still a start. He would arm his soldiers, enable them, and led them to conquer the entire board. By the time a magnificent dragon with scales as dark as midnight landed on the slope of the fuming volcano, carrying a gorgeous shadow on his back, the bow was almost ready. Slayer jumped down with the grace of a dancer, walked over to where Sunny was sitting, and silently retrieved her arrow from the ash. His gaze was as cold ever, full of hidden malice. As soon as Kai assumed his human form, Sunny tossed him the bow. Here, string it. Kai caught the black bow and stared at it for a few seconds, his eyes widening faintly. What a fearsome aura! Placing one end of the bow on the ground, he used his shin to secure it and bent the long bow with seeming ease, stringing it in one smooth motion. Naturally, in truth, bending it was not easy at all. People usually assumed that archers were less imposing than swordsmen, as far as physical power went, but really, it was the opposite. An average archer had to be far stronger than a melee fighter since drawing a powerful bow demanded immense strength, And Kai, despite his deceptively elegant appearance, had never been merely an average archer. Poser. Witnessing how unburdened the charming saint looked while stringing the supreme bow, Sunny almost regretted not making it even more potent. However, he knew that Kai was simply showcasing perfect technique. Naturally, his chiseled muscles were taut and straining under the ivory armor, his veins bulging. A drop of sweat that rolled down the charming saint's face was proof. Shaking his head, Sunny looked at Slayer. "Hey, how about you share some arrows with this handsome young man?" Instead of answering, Slayer raised the arrow she was still holding in her hand and silently moved it across her neck. Her message was clear: want to die? Sunny chuckled. All right, gods. Reaching into the shadows once again, he went about crafting deadly arrows. Now, creating a good arrow was also not an easy feat. But luckily, Sunny had had a lot of practice. Looking at Kai, he smiled. You know, one time, I was falling into a flaming sea. So, I drew my bow, and shot myself out of it. Worked like a charm. He was referring to his fall into the sky below, naturally, and the desperate attempt to avoid burning in the sea of divine flames by wrapping his shadow around a flying arrow and using Shadow Step to appear next to it. Kai had been studying his new bow with an enamored expression. That expression speedily crumbled. Looking at Sunny with trembling eyes, he said, Wait, this one does not even make sense. How can it be true? Sunny glanced at him with reproach. Do not question the truth, Nightingale. The truth does not exist to be convenient, nor does it need to be sensible. It simply has to be true. 2316 Winning Strategy. While crafting arrows, Sunny picked one up with a shadow hand and used it to draw a grid in the ash. 7 rows of 7 squares each, 49 in total. Then, he marked some of the squares with various runes. Sunny had not paid a lot of attention to the placement of the figures on the jade board, but he could still recall it flawlessly. There were also 5 squares marked by special carvings, one at the very center of the board, and one at the middle squares of each outer row. Eventually, he pointed to the grid and spoke. This is what the game board looked like in the toy room. As you can see, the Ash domain is on the verge of losing. We only have 3 squares left, occupied by the Ash Tyrant, that is me, and 2 Ash Beasts. That is you and Slayer. He pointed to the 3 squares in the lowest row of the grid. Since one of them was the middle square of an outer row, it was marked with a special rune. You should have seen the fortress behind us. I think that it is the Ash Castle, one of the special squares Seishan mentioned. There is a similar carving on the opposite square, so this is where the Snow Castle should be. Sunny pointed the arrow to the middle square of the uppermost row. However, the carvings on the other 3 special squares are different. They are not castles, but what are they? I do not know. The one in the very middle of the board is different from the 2 on the left and right outer rows, as well. Sunny sighed. Well, we'll learn eventually. What is more important is where the 12 snow abominations are standing. Do you see a pattern? Kai studied the grid. On it, 3 snow beasts were facing the 3 remaining ash figures. On the opposite side of the board, the snow tyrant was standing in the snow castle, defended by a snow devil and 2 snow beasts in the row below. The second snow devil was guarding the central square of the board. A snow demon and 2 snow monsters were defending the middle square on the right outer row. And finally, the last snow figure, another demon, was in the lower left corner, all by itself. Kai frowned. It looks to me like 3 beasts are preparing to besiege the Ash Castle, while the rest of the figures are protecting important squares on the board. 3 are protecting the Snow Castle and their tyrant, 3 are protecting whatever that right middle square is, 1 is protecting the heart of the map. And 1 seems to have lost its way and wandered into a corner. Sun Yu grinned. Exactly. Kai stared at him for a while, then asked, so? Sunny looked at him meaningfully. How should I know? Do I look like a great chess player to you? Kai blinked a couple of times. You're not. Sunny scoffed. No, I am not. To be honest, as soon as I understood what it takes to be good at playing chess, I instantly lost interest. Let me tell you, it's not a game, it's a chore. Why would I waste my time mastering something so tedious? He shook his head. Playing chess with teacher Julius had been fun and exciting at the beginning, but when Sunny realized that it was all about patterns and calculations, he rapidly grew bored. After all, he did enough calculating in his actual life, Aure Dai. The chaotic mayhem of checkers seemed more fun. And naturally, nothing beat the noble king of games, backgammon. Because there were countless ways to cheat when throwing dice, which was the funnest part. Sunny looked at Kai. Why, are you good at chess? Kai scratched the tip of his nose. Not really. To be honest, being serious about chess takes a lot of time. And I, always had better ways to spend my time. Sunny looked at him with suspicion. Did he just lightly point out that he had a life? Well, naturally, that guy had probably been too popular to be the president of the chess club. If Kai had been the president of any club, it would have probably been the Heartthrob Club. Shaking his head, Sunny sighed. So, none of us knows anything about how to win at chess. Plus, this is not even chess, this is death game. Actually, it is a bizarre version of the death game created by Ariel, which functions according to its own set of rules. We do not know these rules yet, so it will be hard to come up with a strategy. He stared at the grid, a concerned expression on his face. But then, Sunny stirred. Actually, he turned his head and looked at Slayer, who was idly standing a few steps away from them. I was not entirely correct. There is someone among us who might know everything about how to play death game. Slayer was the shadow of a person who had lived in the dream realm thousands of years ago. Since death game had been popular among her people, she might have very well been a masterful player. Sunny scrutinized her for a while, then asked hopefully, hey. Do you know how to play the death game? What is the best strategy? Was victory even possible when 46 of the 49 squares already belonged to the snow domain? Slayer turned her head and looked down at him, her inky black eyes betraying no emotion. Sunny almost lost hope when she suddenly moved, looking at the grid he had drawn. The shadow remained motionless for a while, then used the arrow in her hand to carve a run in the ash. Kai looked at the rune with curiosity. Sacrifice. Sunny nodded slowly. Yes, sacrifice. To be precise, it's a particular kind of sacrifice. A sacrificial killing. So, the strategy Slayer recommended was slaying someone as a sacrifice. Kai frowned. Is she suggesting that you should sacrifice one of your pawns? Sunny was looking at the grid. Eventually, he slowly shook his head. No, I don't think so. Do you remember what else Sishin said? That there are special squares inserted in versions of death game called shrines. There, adversary figures can be sacrificed to enhance your own. If the shrines were important enough for Slayer to point at them as the secret of achieving victory, then the Snow Tyrant would put a lot of importance into protecting the shrines, as well. From that, Sunny could deduce which of the 5 special squares hid the shrines. If I am not mistaken, they are the middle squares of the right and left outer rows. Sunny looked at Slayer and smiled. So, you can write, huh? She just stared at him silently. Sunny chuckled, then asked in a teasing tone, well, then, can you please spell it out for us? How do we win this damn game? Slayer regarded him silently for a moment, then leaned forward. The tip of her arrow plunged into the ash, pierced the square where the snow castle stood, and destroyed the runes describing the Snow Tyrant. Sunny stared at the arrow for a few seconds, and then grinned. Figures. 2317 Worm of Doubt. Sunny let out a long sigh, then fell into contemplation. He studied the grid for a while, his eyes hidden in deep shadow. Eventually, though, he glanced at Kai. We lack information about the rules of this world, and trying to learn more about it through trial and error seems too dangerous. This places us in an unfortunately passive position. We have no choice, no better choice, at least, than to wait for the adversary to make their move. We will be able to understand more about Ariel's game by watching the Snow Abominations act. He grimaced. You mentioned that the insects in the ice hive seem to be slowly awakening, while the other 2 beasts have not moved yet. It is not surprising, really, considering that they must have spent thousands of years imprisoned in this game. But, now that we are here, they'll probably come to their senses soon. Sunny considered Kai for a few seconds, then asked. In the meantime, you led soldiers in your second nightmare in Antarctica, didn't you? You also spent enough time with Morgan to learn a thing or two from her. What do you think our strategy should be? Kai raised an eyebrow and hesitated for a few seconds. I am a bit surprised to hear about my second nightmare from you, Sunny. But if you know what happened to us in the Kingdom of Hope, you know that the only thing I led my soldiers to was their deaths. As for Antarctica, my role there was merely that of a tactical commander. Our broader strategy was usually decided by the Army HQ. Sunny smiled. Nightingale, Kai, my friend. I know that you are plagued by insecurity, but please, for the love of gods, don't let it fester into an inferiority complex on my account. Excessive modesty is not a flattering look for a distinguished gentleman, even one as dashing as you. So cut it out and take accountability for your accomplishments, for once. Kai glanced at him, a peculiar emotion hidden in his gorgeous green eyes. Sunny sighed. The charming saint was often too nice for his own good, but that was not his only character flaw. He was also unsure of himself, deep down. Sunny knew that Kai had always felt somewhat insecure about his place in the cohort, and as a result, in the broader world. He could understand these doubts, to a degree. After all, the members of Changing Stars cohort were exceptional individuals, each and every one of them, ever since the Forgotten Shore. There was Neffys herself, Cassie and her prophetic gift, Sunny and his fated encounters, and Effie, who had survived years hunting alone on the streets of the Dark City. Later, there was also Soul Reaper Jet, a master whom even saints feared. In comparison, Kai was a far more mundane individual. He had survived the perils of the Dark City behind the walls of the Bright Castle, earning soul shards to pay Gunlog's tribute by selling his rare aspect ability. In a sense, he was more similar to someone like Aiko than to the exalted warriors around him. And yet, Kai had risen to the occasion every time his help had been needed, for no other reason than his innate integrity and principles. He was not driven by an overwhelming obsession or forced into action by inescapable fate. Instead, he simply did his best to do what he felt was the right thing to do. From the harrowing reaches of the Forgotten Shore to the dark expanse of the Tomb of Ariel, he elevated himself step by step until there was hardly a handful of people in the world who could say that they had accomplished more, and endured more, than Saint Nightingale, the heroic Dragonslayer. It was just that Kai's opinion of himself never seemed to catch up to his accomplishments. Sunny may not have liked that his friend was always selling himself short, but there was little he could do about it. After all, there was some truth to what Kai thought about himself. It would have been hard for anyone, not just him, to contend against inexplicable monsters like Sunny, Neffys, or other powerhouses in their orbit. But now, Kai's insecurity was not merely undeserved, it was an actual problem. Sovereigns were arrogant by nature, after all, they had to be. Only someone supremely confident in their cause could be bold enough to force their will upon the world. How could someone who doubted himself convince the world to submit? So, Sunny hoped to disabuse Kai of the preposterous notion that he was somehow less deserving than the rest of them. I'm really not the right person for this job. Actually, he was arguably the worst choice. After all, Sunny had never been great at dealing with people. He was so atrocious at it, in fact, that he had even ended up living alone in seclusion and slowly losing his mind multiple times in his life. But at the same time, he was also the best choice. Because Kai was keenly aware of lies and insincerity, while Sunny never lied. Kai glanced at him with a peculiar expression for a while. Eventually, he asked in a cautious tone, "Sunny, you think that I'm dashing?" Sunny blinked a few times. That is your main takeaway." He exhaled slowly through gritted teeth. "Bastard, are you fishing for compliments now?" "Sure, yes, I do think that. Your style is impeccable, and your face is a weapon of mass destruction." "Happy now?" Kai smiled radiantly. "Why, thank you. It really means a lot, coming from the owner of the Eye Candy CA." "Shut up." Sunny huffed and pointed to the map of Ariel's game. "Strategy. Remember." Kai kept smiling for a few seconds, then turned to the grid drawn in the ash. A quiet sigh escaped from his lips. "We really don't know much about how this game works, but generally, the mountain we are occupying is the castle, which suggests some kind of defensive advantage. Common logic dictates that we should make use of these fortifications to repel the adversary, but actually, such a strategy will simply become our death. Since the adversary forces are so overwhelming, locking ourselves into a defensive strategy will merely postpone our defeat." Sunny nodded. Kai was, without a doubt, right on that account. 2318 A new paradigm. Trying to defend the Ash Castle was a losing strategy. They could potentially deal with the 3 snow beasts, but that would take time. And in that time, more powerful figures would most likely reach the Ash Castle, leading to a checkmate. Sunny had grown used to dealing with problems by using overwhelming strength as of late. But here in Ariel's game, he was once again weak. He did not have his shades, his shadows, his memories. He did not even have a single shadow to augment himself. If a couple of demons of a high enough rank showed up, surrounded by monsters and beasts, his end would be swift and inevitable. In order to survive, Sunny had to act with cunning and foresight. He narrowed his eyes and asked Kai calmly, "So, what should we do?" Kai shrugged. The same thing Ki Song did at Greater Crossing, I guess. Abandon the fortified position and attack instead, aiming to crush the adversary forces while they are isolated from each other. He glanced at Sunny with curiosity and asked, "Am I correct?" Sunny remained silent for a few seconds. "You are not exactly wrong, but you are also not exactly right either." He sighed and pointed to where Slayer's arrow was sticking from the ash. Slayer seems to understand the essence of this conflict better. You see, Kai, your answer is based on sound military paradigm, but it is an obsolete military paradigm, one formed by thousands of years of war and conflict in the waking world. The reality of our world has changed, though, but our thinking has not been quick enough to adapt. He pointed to the grid. I hear that chess is a game that is supposed to represent a military conflict, a mundane military conflict. Death Game, however, is a game that represents a supernatural military conflict, one where demons and devils play the role of soldiers. And naturally, there is a tyrant. This time, Sunny pointed to himself. In a mundane war, destroying the adversary army is a primary goal, after all, it is tantamount to victory. But in a world infected by the nightmare spell, an individual can possess greater power than an army. The army is merely a tool that the tyrant uses. It exists for convenience. Therefore, the primary goal is to destroy the tyrant. Sunny glanced at the runes describing the three snow beasts. In other words, your very premise is wrong, because you see the act of destroying the adversary forces as inherently valuable. But in fact, it is not. It is only valuable if killing them brings us closer to slaying the snow tyrant, and if it doesn't, then there's no point in fighting with them at all. He smiled, which is not to say that killing them is entirely useless. It's just of minor importance. Or it would have been, if not for one detail, a detail that makes killing these beasts actually detrimental to us. Kai raised an eyebrow. I can somewhat follow your logic in that fighting the snow abominations might not have any value for our current situation. But, detrimental, surely, removing them from the board will at least give us more breathing room. Plus, no matter how powerful the snow tyrant is, the snow tyrant surrounded by the snow army would still be more powerful. Sunny nodded. Sure, but you are forgetting the initial point Slayer made. He gestured to the rune the silent shadow had drawn in the ash. Sacrifice. There is actually a way to kill the snow abominations that will make us stronger. Because of that, killing them in any other way will actually be no different from depriving ourselves of power we desperately need to kill the snow tyrant. Next, he pointed to the squares on the edges of the grid where the shrines usually stood. One was defended by several snow figures, while the other one was empty. Killing our enemies at first opportunity holds close to no value. In fact, it holds negative value. Just because we can slay them does not mean we should, unless we slay them in one of these shrines. Do you understand now? Kai remained silent for a long time, thinking. Eventually, he asked in a subdued tone. Are you sure you're not a great chess player, Sunny? Sunny scoffed. What are you talking about? This has nothing to do with chess. It's just common logic. Kai gave him a dubious look. I wouldn't call such logic common, though. Then, he turned and glanced at Slayer with curiosity. It is also impressive that your employee was able to not only fathom the essence of this game, but also explain it by writing a single rune and plunging her arrow into the ash. She is quite eloquent. Sunny could not help but laugh. Actually, he almost toppled over from laughter. Oh, do you admire her now? I see you have a type, my employees, he grinned. Be careful, though, this one is a real hard hacker. Actually, that's how we met. Kai looked at him in confusion. She broke your heart. Sunny nodded energetically. Exactly. Well, to be precise, she put an arrow through my heart. Hurt like hell. Turning to Slayer, Sunny smiled pleasantly. But don't worry, the next time we met, we tussled inside a dead god, who was walking around inside the corpse of another, greater dead god, and when the dead god crumbled, I returned the favor. By killing her. Oh, and after I killed her, we fought for about another year, this time inside my own soul. I even died myself in the meantime. Quite a rigorous selection process, as you can see. But how else can one find good employees? Kai stared at him blankly. Meeting his hollow gaze, Sunny raised an eyebrow. What, do you use a different recruitment method for the Nightsingers? Kai closed his eyes for a moment and asked, his voice devoid of all emotions. Sunny, can I ask you something? Sunny blinked a couple of times. Sure, you can. Kai inhaled deeply. Do you possibly suffer from some kind of mental illness? Sunny frowned. What? Of course not. When Kai exhaled slowly, he added with a smile. Suffering from mental illnesses. How trite. If anything, mental illnesses suffer from me. Kai's eyes trembled. 2319 educational trip. Looking at Kai, Sunny felt a profound sense of amusement. However, that amusement came and went swiftly. Letting out a sigh, he glanced up. The firmament of the miniature realm was obscured by the clouds of ash, but it was clear above the snowy peaks. It seemed like the moon was descending, the night would be over soon, making way for the radiance of the day. Somehow, Sunny felt that this short moment of peace was not going to last much longer. And the night. What will the snow tyrant do? And what could the snow tyrant do? Actually, Sunny was aware of the subtle strangeness of his situation. He had assumed the place of the ash tyrant, who was a figure of vital importance, no doubt, but merely a figure nonetheless. Sunny was not the player. His suspicion that there was a distinction between the two was based on a couple of facts. First of all, if the players of Ariel's game were supposed to act as tyrants of their respective domains, then there would be no snow tyrant anywhere in this artificial WOGLD. After all, the original players of the game were long gone. Secondly, his status as the Ash Tyrant had not granted Sunny any new powers, including the power to control lesser Ash figures. Kai and Slayer were not compelled to obey him because of the nature of the game, they simply listened to him because he was Sunny. Similarly, if there was a snow tyrant on the opposite end of the board, would they have any control over the snow abominations? He was not sure. Depending on the answer, though, Sunny was facing two entirely different perils. If the snow tyrant could control the figures freely, then he would be facing a coordinated and lethal force. This game would be a battle of two minds. If not, the beasts would roam free, and the main obstacle standing in his way would be this artificial realm itself. We'll see soon. Kai raised an eyebrow. What? Sunny let out another sigh. We'll see what kind of battle this is once the snow abominations start to move. He glanced at the three snowy peaks. If they are mere beasts, they'll rush to devour us straight away. If they are minions of a tyrant, though, they'll conquer the other two volcanoes first, to enhance the snow domain and weaken the ash domain as much as possible before the final siege. Our response will differ drastically depending on what they'll do. He created a needle out of shadows and went about finishing a quiver for Kai. Less than a minute later, it was done. Sunny placed the arrows he had crafted into the quiver and offered it to the charming archer with a smile. Here, this will do for now. Standing up, Sunny brushed the ash off his clothes and pointed to the pillar of smoke rising into the sky behind them. We should probably explore the castle while we can. As they descended into the crater, Sunny glanced at Kai, and then asked calmly. You have some experience fighting Great Nightmare creatures, yes? Kai nodded. Yes. As a government saint, during the war in Bastion, and later as the steward of Ravenheart, I've faced a few. Sunny smiled darkly. How was it? Kai's expression grew concerned. Like fighting gods. He remained silent for a few seconds, then added with a sigh. The great ones are stronger and more fearsome than abominations of lesser ranks, true. But I've long grown used to fighting against enemies who are superior to me in all regards. The problem is that facing them feels different from a normal battle. It is as if the world itself is on their side. Sunny nodded. The world is indeed on their side, because they force the world to be on their side. What separates those great and supreme from those of lesser ranks is the quality of our will. Our will is tyrannical enough to subjugate the world, to some degree, at least. Well, you must know all that already. After all, both Neffys and I spent quite a lot of time sharing our experience with Cassie, who then compiled a report for those who need to know. Kai glanced at Sunny with a distant expression. Yes, I know. However, I am sorry to say this, Sunny, but I don't think that anyone else will be able to repeat what you two have done, attaining supremacy naturally, I mean. That is not myself, doubt talking. It's just that you and Neffys often underestimate how exceptional you are. Underestimating it woefully. Sunny pursed his lips. Kai, meanwhile, let out a sigh. Which means that the rest of us will have to do it the usual way. We will have to challenge the fourth nightmare. Sunny studied him for a while, then looked away. Only 4 people have ever survived the fourth nightmare. You will face great nightmare creatures there, too, so, think of this little excursion of ours as a practice run. I'll handle the cursed ones, if we have to face any, but the great abominations will be on you. I'm sure you'll manage. After all, Sunny wanted to mention how he had killed a great devil as a sleeper, but held himself back for once. Now was not time for jokes. I'll have your back. You have two perfect teachers with you, anyway. I am a supreme myself, while she. He pointed to Slayer. She is probably the most prolific killer I have ever met. Not only that, but her main killing tool is a bow, as well. So watch her carefully, and learn from her. There was really no better role model for Kai than Slayer. So, Sunny had high hopes for him. Having two exceptional archers assisting him against the snow nightmare creature sounded like a dream, too. He was rarely pampered by having such support. Kai smiled. I will. Sunny hesitated for a few seconds, thinking what else to say. It was not a matter of motivating Kai to do his best, he had never lacked motivation. It was more of a matter of showing him a perspective that would make him want to do more than his best. To have the will to succeed no matter what. This was the only way to survive in the ruthless world of the nightmare spell. Eventually, Sunny asked, your nightmares, how did you survive them? Kai contemplated his question for a while, then answered with a faint smile. I survived because of the people who were by my side. Sunny nodded. Indeed, because no one survives in the dream realm alone. He glanced at Kai and added evenly. But to those people, you were and will be the person by their side. Their survival will depend on you, just like your survival will depend on theirs. Kai's expression changed subtly, and his smile disappeared. Witnessing that change, Sunny looked away. So, how many more people will survive the fourth nightmare in the future is up to you. Take responsibility. Kai remained silent for a long time, then nodded silently. By then, they had reached the crumbling castle. 2320 Ash Castle. The Ash Castle was a strange and towering structure. It was built above the main vent of the volcano, seemingly hovering in the air. At first glance, it seemed as if its immense weight was supported by nothing except the rising torrents of smoke, but at a closer glance, Sunny saw enormous chains biting into the dark rock of the crater, covered in thick layers of soot. The castle was hanging above the abyss, the smoke-filled emptiness serving as its moat. The defensive value of such a structure was questionable, to say the least. Sure, any attacker would plummet into the fiery depths of the volcano unless they found a way to breach the wide chasm, but at the same time, the defenders would find it difficult to prevent the enemy from destroying the anchors of the chains that held the castle in the air. Extending his shadow sense into the abyssal vent, Sunny sensed more chains fastening the castle to its walls further down. There seemed to be some kind of mechanism built into the obsidian plate that served as the foundation for the charred fortress, now broken and in a state of disrepair. Was this castle able to descend into the depths of the volcano once? Even if it had been, it was stuck in place now, barely able to support its own weight. Sunny imagined the whole structure plummeting into the smoke under their feet. That would be troublesome, but not too troublesome. After all, he could fly away at any moment. The drawbridge of the castle was raised, so Sunny manifested two black wings and offered Slayer a hand. She glanced at it chillingly, while Kai smiled. I see you are a gentleman. As Slayer took his hand, Sunny strained his muscles and tossed her into the air. The nimble shadow shot over the chasm like a bullet, disappearing into the smoke. A few seconds later, she landed on one of the crumbling towers of the castle, twirled to regain her balance, and summoned her bow in one graceful motion. Her skirt flared, and by the time its hem fell to rest on her smooth ebony thigh once again, an arrow was already knocked on the string of the black bow. Kai watched all of that happen in silence. Sunny was blinded by the smoke, but could sense the shadows. The charming archer, however, could see everything transpire just fine. He sighed. Never mind. Sunny smiled. What, did you expect me to give her a ride? Thanks, but no thanks. The last time she mounted me was too memorable. He paused for a moment, and then added in a glum tone. I mean, she cut off my wings, strangled me, and almost drove a knife into my skull. Kai blinked a couple of times. She did. When Sunny nodded, he gave him a reproachful look. You know, something like that would have been good to know before I carried her across the sea of clouds on my back. Sunny grinned. I did cross my mind to give you a warning. But I was sure that she would not try to kill you, well, mostly sure. Reasonably sure. I was somewhat sure that she would not try to kill you. With that, he jumped into the chasm, spread his wings, and allowed the currents of heated air to carry him across the abyssal moat of the Ash Castle. Kai followed a few seconds later with a quiet sigh. If there had been something perilous waiting for them inside, Slayer would have already turned it into a pincushion with her arrows. So, the two of them landed calmly on the cracked floor of the castle's vast courtyard, then walked toward the crumbling keep. Slayer allowed her bow to turn into a slender chain vambrace, then climbed down the tower with lethal grace. She seemed to plummet from one support to another, wedging her short swords between the weathered stones when there was none to find purchase on. In just a few short moments, she reached the ground and joined them. When they entered the keep, Sunny glanced around with a surprised expression. What looked like a castle from the outside was actually merely a crude model of one. There was nothing inside, really, no floors, no chambers, no complicated maze of corridors and stairwells. Instead, there was simply a vast empty space, the floor covered in ash that piled like mountains in the corners. It seemed that even Ariel's attention to detail had a limit. Well, it makes sense. After all, the ash tyrants that had populated this castle once would not have been humans. Their size would have varied greatly, too. The towering gate of the keep hinted that some of them were truly enormous. Do you see anything under the ash? Sunny did not know what he wanted to find, exactly, but he had hoped to discover some clues about Ariel, his game, and the Jade Queen. Kai shook his head slowly. It's all in ruins, but there is some kind of pedestal in the center. They looked at each other, then made their way to the heart of the empty keep. There, the floor of the castle opened into a great circular pit. Smoke rose through the opening like a rugged pillar, escaping through a similar one in the roof of the ash castle. And just in front of the pit, there was a charred stone pedestal that resembled an altar, its surface covered in ash. Walking closer, Sunny hesitated for a few seconds, then brushed the ash away. His hand felt two small shapes hidden beneath it. Clearing more of the ash, Sunny picked one of them up and studied it impassively. There, in his palm, lay a bestial figurine cut from flawless white jade. It was the figure of a snow beast. 2 of them, 12 of the 14 snow figures remained on the board, which meant that the player of the ash domain had managed to slay two beasts. And here, 2 snow beast figurines were resting on an altar. That could not have been a coincidence. Why do you think these figures are here? Kai's question made Sunny frown. He remained silent for a few seconds, then shrugged. I'm not entirely sure. Then, he suddenly remembered something. The ancient bones resting in the depths of the Ravenheart volcano. Following an impulse, Sunny shifted his weight a little and tossed the figure of the snow beast into the pit. It disappeared into the smoke without a trace. A dozen seconds passed in silence, and then, Sunny was suddenly somewhere else.